Hello. Okay, let's enjoy Samuel Johnson's Rambler number 14 for Saturday, May 5th, 1750. The title of this essay is The Difference Between an Author's Writings and His Conversation. We begin with a little Latin. Nil fuit unquam sic impar sibi by Horace. I'm going to quote, "Sure such a various creature ne'er was known." Francis. Among the many inconsistencies which folly produces, or infirmity suffers, in the human mind, there has often been observed a manifest and striking contrariety between the life of an author and his writings. And Milton, in a letter to a learned stranger, by whom he had been visited, with great reason congratulates himself upon the consciousness of being found equal to his own character, and having preserved, in a private and familiar interview, that reputation which his works had procured him. Those whom the appearance of virtue, or the evidence of genius, have tempted to a nearer knowledge of the writer in whose performances they may be found, have indeed had frequent reason to repent their curiosity. The bubble that sparked before them has become common water at the touch. The phantom of perfection has vanished when they wished to press it to their own bosom. They have lost the pleasure of imagining how far humanity may be exalted, and, perhaps, felt themselves less inclined to toil up the steeps of virtue when they observe those who seem best able to point the way loitering below, as either afraid of the labor or doubtful of the reward. It has been long the custom of the Oriental monarchs to hide themselves in gardens and palaces, to avoid the conversation of mankind, and to be known to their subjects only by their edicts. The same policy is no less necessary to him that writes than to him that governs, for men would not more patiently submit to be taught than commanded by one known to have the same follies and weaknesses with themselves. A sudden intruder into the closet of an author would perhaps feel equal indignation with the officer, who, having long solicited admission into the presence of Sardanapalus, saw him, not consulting upon laws, inquiring into grievances, or modelling armies, but employed in feminine amusements, and directing the ladies in their work. It is not difficult to conceive, however, that for many reasons a man writes much better than he lives. For, without entering into refined speculation, it may be shown much easier to design than to perform. A man proposes his schemes of life in a state of abstraction and disengagement, exempt from the enticements of hope, the solicitations of affection, the importunities of appetite, or the depressions of fear, and in the same state with him that teaches upon land the art of navigation, to whom the sea is always smooth, and the wind always prosperous. The mathematicians are well acquainted with the difference between pure science, which has to do only with ideas, and the application of its laws to the use of life, in which they are constrained to submit to the imperfection of matter and the influence of accidents. Thus, in moral discussions, it is to be remembered that many impediments obstruct our practice, which very easily give way to theory. The speculatist is only in danger of erroneous reasoning, but the man involved in life has his own passions and those of others to encounter, and is embarrassed by 1,000 inconveniences which confound him with variety of impulse, and either perplex or obstruct his way. He is forced to act without deliberation, and obliged to choose before he can examine. He is surprised by sudden alterations of the state of things, and changes his measures according to superficial appearances. He is led by others, either because he is indolent or because he is timorous. He is sometimes afraid to know what is right, and sometimes finds friends or enemies diligent to deceive him. We are, therefore, not to wonder that most fail amidst tumult and snares and danger in the observance of those precepts which they lay down in solitude, safety, and tranquillity, with a mind unbiased and with liberty unobstructed. It is the condition of our present state to see more than we can attain. The exactness, vigilance, and caution can never maintain a single day of unmingled innocence, much less can the utmost efforts of incorporate mind reach these summits of speculative virtue. It is, however, necessary for the idea of perfection to be proposed, that we may have some object to which our endeavors are to be directed. And he that is most deficient in the duties of life makes some atonement for his faults, if he warns others against his own failings, and hinders, by the salubrity of his admonitions, the contagion of his example. Nothing is more unjust, however common, than to charge with hypocrisy him that expresses zeal for those virtues which he neglects to practice, since he may be sincerely convinced of the advantages of conquering his passions without having yet obtained the victory, as a man may be confident of the advantages of a voyage or a journey without having courage or industry to undertake it, and may honestly recommend to others those attempts which he neglects himself. The interest which the corrupt part of mankind have in hardening themselves against every motive to amendment, has disposed them to give to these contradictions, when they can be produced against the cause of virtue, that weight which they will not allow them in any other case. They see men act in opposition to their interest, without supposing that they do not know it. Those who give way to the sudden violence of passion, and forsake the most important pursuits for petty pleasures, are not supposed to have changed their opinions, or to approve their own conduct. In moral or religious questions alone, they determine the sentiments by the actions, and charge every man with endeavoring to impose upon the world whose writings are not confirmed by his life. They never consider that themselves neglect or practice something every day inconsistent with their own settled judgment, nor discover that the conduct of the advocates for virtue can little increase or lessen the obligations of their dictates. Argument is to be invalidated only by argument, and is in itself of the same force, whether or not it convinces him by whom it is proposed. Yet, since this prejudice, however unreasonable, is always likely to have some prevalence, it is the duty of every man to take care lest he should hinder the efficacy of his own instructions. When he desires to gain the belief of others, he should show that he believes himself. And when he teaches the fitness of virtue by his reasoning, he should, by his example, prove its possibility. Thus much at least may be required of him, that he shall not act worse than others, because he writes better, nor imagine that, by the merit of his genius, he may claim indulgence beyond mortals, or of the mortals of the lower classes, and be excused for want of prudence or neglect of virtue. Bacon, in his History of the Winds, after having offered something to the imagination as desirable, often proposes lower advantages in its place to the reason it is as attainable. The same method may be sometimes pursued in moral endeavors, which this philosopher has observed in natural inquiries. Having first set positive and absolute excellences before us, we may be pardoned, though we sink down to humbler virtue, trying, however, to keep our point always in view, and struggling not to lose ground, though we cannot gain it. It is recorded of Sir Matthew Hale that he for a long time concealed the consecration of himself to the stricter duties of religion, lest by some flagitious and shameful action he should bring piety into disgrace. For the same reason, it may be prudent for a writer who apprehends that he shall not enforce his own maxims by his domestic character to conceal his name, that he may not injure them. There are, indeed, a great number whose curiosity to gain a more familiar knowledge of successful writers is not so much prompted by an opinion of their power to improve as to delight, and who expect from them not arguments against vice or dissertations on temperance or justice, but flights of wit and sallies of pleasantry, or at least acute remarks, nice distinctions, justness of sentiment, and elegance of diction. This expectation is, indeed, specious and probable, and yet such is the fate of all human hopes that it is very often frustrated, and those who raise admiration by their books, disgust by their company. A man of letters, by the most part, spends in the privacies of study that season of life in which the manners are to be softened into ease and polished into elegance, and, when he has gained knowledge enough to be respected, has neglected the minuter acts by which he might have pleased. When he enters life, if his temper be soft and timorous, he is diffident and bashful, from the knowledge of his defects. Or if he was born with spirit and resolution, he is ferocious and arrogant, from the consciousness of his merit. He is either dissipated by the awe of company, and unable to recollect his reading and arrange his arguments, or he is hot and dogmatical, quick in opposition, and tenacious in defense, disabled by his own violence, and confuted by his haste to triumph. The graces of writing and conversation are of different kinds, and though he who excels in one might have been, with opportunities and application, equally successful in the other, yet as many please by extemporary talk, though utterly unacquainted with the more accurate method, the more labored beauties which composition requires. So it is very possible that men, wholly accustomed to works of study, may be without that readiness of conception and affluence of language always necessary to colloquial entertainment. They may want address to watch the hints which conversation offers for the display of their particular attainments, or they may be so much unfurnished with matter on common subjects that discourse, not profusely literary, glides over them as heterogeneous bodies, without admitting their conceptions to mix in the circulation. A transition from an author's book to his conversation is too often like an entrance into a large city after a distant prospect. Remotely, we see nothing but spires of temples and turrets of palaces, and imagine it the residence of splendor, grandeur, and magnificence. But when we have passed the gates, we find it perplexed with narrow passages, disgraced with despicable cottages, embarrassed with obstructions, and clouded with smoke. Wow. What a fascinating observation regarding the reality of the writer and the visions, the worlds, the values that they may subscribe to or recommend in their work. Fascinating.